Around 1200 BC, the most advanced civilization on Earth fell apart. Not one kingdom. Almost all of them at the same time. This is the story of the Bronze Age collapse, the greatest unsolved mystery in ancient history. To understand how strange this is, you have to understand what existed before it. By 1200 BC, the Eastern Mediterranean was the most connected, most advanced network of civilizations the world had ever seen. Egypt was a superpower, ruled by pharaohs, controlling the Nile, trading across 3 continents. The Hittite Empire dominated Anatolia, a military powerhouse that had fought Egypt to a standstill at the Battle of Kadesh. The Mycenaean Greeks built massive palace complexes, the same civilization that inspired the legends of Troy and Agamemnon. Babylon, Assyria, and Cyprus formed a web of trade routes carrying tin, copper, grain, and luxury goods across thousands of miles. These civilizations wrote to each other. They had diplomats, royal marriages, trade agreements. Letters survive today, kings calling each other brother, complaining about shipments, requesting gold, negotiating peace. This was a connected, literate, sophisticated world. And then, within about 50 years, almost all of it was gone. Cities across the region were destroyed and never rebuilt. Mycenaean palaces burned to the ground. The Hittite Empire simply vanished from history. Egypt survived, but was permanently weakened, never regaining its former power. Trade routes that had operated for centuries collapsed overnight. Population in some regions dropped by as much as 90%. Writing systems disappeared. Linear B, the script used by the Mycenaeans, was lost for hundreds of years. The art of large-scale architecture vanished. People simply forgot how to do things their grandparents had done. Historians call what followed a dark age, not a metaphor, an actual collapse of literacy, trade, and complex society that lasted for centuries. So what happened? For decades, one theory dominated. Egyptian records from this exact period describe an invasion by a mysterious group called the Sea Peoples. Pharaoh Ramesses III left inscriptions boasting of a great victory against them, describing a coalition of seafaring raiders attacking Egypt by land and by sea. The names are strange and hard to place. The Peliset, the Shurdan, the Danaan. Some scholars connect them to the later Philistines. For a long time, the simple version of the story was that hordes of unknown invaders swept across the Mediterranean, burning everything in their path. Mystery solved. Except it isn't that simple. Modern archaeologists looked closer, and the Sea Peoples theory started to crack. First problem, the destruction wasn't uniform. Some cities were burned. Others were simply abandoned, with no signs of battle at all. If a single invading force caused this, why does the evidence look so different from place to place? Second problem, Egypt's own records describe fighting off the Sea Peoples successfully. If Egypt won, why did Egypt still collapse into decline afterward? Third problem, where did the Sea Peoples even come from? Some inscriptions suggest they came from collapsing societies themselves, refugees and raiders created by the very chaos they're blamed for causing, not the original cause. So historians began looking at other explanations, not one cause, many compounding at the same time. The first piece is climate. Tree ring data, pollen samples, and sediment cores from the eastern Mediterranean point to a major drought beginning around 1250 BC and lasting for over a century. This wasn't a bad harvest. This was a multi-generational mega-drought. Bronze Age civilizations depended on intensive agriculture to feed dense populations, fund armies, and support trade. A century-long drought would have caused repeated famines year after year, with no recovery period in between. Letters from this exact era survive showing kings begging each other for emergency grain shipments. One Hittite king wrote directly to Egypt asking for food because, in his own words, there was no grain left in his land. If kingdoms are sending desperate letters for grain, the system is already failing. The second piece is earthquakes. Geologists have identified a cluster of earthquake damage across multiple sites in this exact time frame, sometimes called an earthquake storm, a series of major quakes striking the region in rapid succession over several decades. Several major Bronze Age cities show destruction layers consistent with earthquake damage, not warfare, collapsed walls, crushed skeletons under rubble, structural failure rather than fire damage from raiding. A society already weakened by famine, hit by repeated earthquakes, is a society that cannot easily recover. The third piece is the trade network itself. This is the part modern historians find most fascinating. The Bronze Age economy ran on an incredibly fragile global supply chain. Bronze requires copper and tin. Copper was relatively available. Tin was not. The nearest major tin sources were extremely far away, requiring long, vulnerable trade routes stretching across the Mediterranean and possibly as far as Britain and Afghanistan. Every kingdom depended on this network. If one link broke, the whole system could seize up. A famine in one region disrupts shipping. Disrupted shipping causes shortages elsewhere. Shortages cause unrest. Unrest causes more disruption. It's a chain reaction, a systems collapse, not a single dramatic event. Modern researchers compare it to what economists call a multiplier effect. Remove tin from the system, and you can't make bronze weapons or tools. Without bronze tools, agriculture struggles. Without enough food, populations destabilize. Destabilized populations create refugees and raiders. Those raiders disrupt trade further. The cycle accelerates. The fourth piece is internal collapse. Several Bronze Age societies were highly centralized. Palace economies where a king or administration controlled nearly all production and distribution. This system works well in good times because it's efficient, but it is extremely fragile in bad times because there's no backup. If the central administration fails, everything connected to it fails with it. Clay tablets from collapsing Mycenaean palaces show administrators recording emergency military preparations right up until the records simply stop. Not a transition, a sudden silence. So the real answer to what caused the Bronze Age collapse isn't a single invasion. It's a perfect storm. Drought weakening food supply, earthquakes destroying infrastructure, a fragile trade network reliant on one rare resource, centralized governments unable to adapt, and waves of displaced people turned refugees turned raiders, who then get blamed in the historical record as the cause rather than the symptom. Each factor alone might have been survivable. Together, within the same few decades, they were not. Some civilizations did survive in altered form. Egypt continued, but never regained its former dominance. Assyria endured and eventually grew into a new empire centuries later. But the old, interconnected Bronze Age world, the one with kings writing letters calling each other brother, simply ceased to exist. What followed has historically been called a Dark Age, but modern archaeology is starting to challenge that label too. Communities adapted, ironworking spread, partly because bronze's supply chain had become unreliable and iron, while harder to work, was locally available almost everywhere. In some ways, the very fragility that caused the collapse pushed humanity toward a more resilient material. The eastual rise of Iron Age civilizations, smaller, more decentralized, less dependent on long, fragile trade networks, may be a direct response to the lessons, even if unconscious, of what happened when one Bronze Age system became too interconnected and too fragile at the same time. So why does this matter today? Because the Bronze Age collapse may be the earliest large-scale example in recorded history of something modern societies still worry about. A complex, interconnected, efficient system failing catastrophically when multiple stresses hit at once. Climate stress, resource scarcity, supply chain failure, political rigidity, mass migration. It's not a story about ancient mystery raiders destroying the world. It's a story about how even the most advanced civilizations can be more fragile than they appear, and how collapse rarely has one single cause. It has many, arriving together at exactly the wrong time. The Bronze Age world thought its system was permanent. It had survived for centuries. It had writing, diplomacy, trade, and military power. It still wasn't enough.